So, we have already mentioned him, so we're happy to hand over now to Cardinal Mario Grech. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you, and I may do it as well at the end, for your contribution, not only to this course, but also to your contribution to the publication after the conference that we held last June and was organised also by the Evangelium Gaudium Centre. Thank you for your contribution. And there wasn't an earlier occasion to do it. So, over to you now. And the title of your talk today is Synodality, a Method for Evangelization. So, over to you, Your Eminence. Thank you. I have no words to express my gratitude for this second initiative of your centre. Formation to synodality is a necessity for everyone. We are on a steep learning curve. We are all learning how we can translate and make it into life our ecclesial life as something synodal. So I call and thankful for your prayers. I just want to share some thoughts with you about evangelization. So the theme, I know, of the synod is synodality. But a synodal church is a church in mission, a church in evangelizing, in my opinion. The current synodal path is in reality nothing other than the coherent continuation of the missionary dream that the Pope Francis illustrated in the same paragraph of the programmatic document of his pontificate, which is now almost 10 years ago. Holy Father writes, I dream of a missionary option that is a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything so that the Church's customs, ways of doing things, times and schedules, language and structures can be suitably challenged for the evangelization of today's world, rather than for her self-preservation. The renewal of structures demanded by pastoral conversion can only be understood in this light, as part of an effort to make them more mission-orientated. These words, friends, anticipate the project underlying our synodal journey, a project that concerns precisely the transformation of ecclesial styles and structures in view of a more open and outgoing pastoral action. The synodal reform and the missionary reform of the Church are, in depth, the same thing. The hope of the current synod is that of a Church that, by learning a more synodal style within itself, that is more inclusive and participative, it will be a Church capable of a more credible witness and then of a more effective missionary commitment within the rapidly changing contemporary world. Deepening the link between synodality and mission is certainly among the main purposes of this synod. A synod whose title is For a Synodal Church. and whose subtitle is Communion, Participation and Mission. The word mission appears last in the list, not because it is the least important, but on the contrary, because it is the one that, so to speak, presses outwards, ad extra, stimulating us to understand how a more synodal church is at the same time a more missionary church. As I see it, as a new stage in the reception of the Second Vatican Council, the Synod is carrying out a development, both theological and pastoral, around our usual conception of mission, resuming and at the same time carrying forward this conciliar turning point of which the Constitution, Lumen Gentium, and above all the decrees ad gentes, constitute the most successful expression. Schematically, one could summarize this development around a few key words: inclusion, periphery; inculturality, decentralization; participation, responsibility. So, first aspect that the Synod is bringing out is the growing realization that the Church, if it is to be faithful to the mission received from Christ, must become increasingly capable of radical inclusion, shared belonging, and deep hospitality. Mission, put another way, goes hand in hand with inclusion. This is expressed very well by the image of the tent used by the Continental document, and also reproposed in many of the Continental documents. The tent, in fact, has the possibility of extending to welcome others within it, making room for their diversity. Many diocesan, national, and continental syntheses point out, not without bitterness, the problem of a church perceived by believers even more than by non-believers as an exclusive and excluding community. The church of closed doors, of customs and fees to be paid. Although this vision should not be generalized and requires an unhurried interpretation, there is no doubt that it is rooted in the lived experience of so many who today feel outside the church, even if they are baptized, thus representing the first field of ecclesial mission. Inclusion must not, of course, entail any form of Irenicism, indifferentism, or relativism. It is not the gospel that must change, but our way of proclaiming it. It is certain, however, that our way of proclaiming it cannot change unless our way of understanding it changes. That is, unless we begin to understand it better. Inclusion, precisely in the genuine logic of the gospel, demands that we go beyond the fences, that is, towards the margins, the borders, the peripheries, precisely the peripheries, understood in Pope Francis's meaning as an anthropological or existential space before being a geographical area. So it is the first field of the Church's mission, to which this synod is drawing attention.
According to the aforementioned continental stage document, in this journey, the churches have realized that the path to greater inclusion, that is, the extended tent, is achieved gradually. It begins with listening and demands a broader and deeper conversion of attitudes and structures, as well as new approaches to pastoral accompaniment, and a readiness to recognize that the peripheries can be the place where a call to conversion resounds and to putting the gospel more decisively into practice. We could say that while, according to the traditional undertaking of the Missio ad Gentes, already superseded by Vatican II, the missionary is the one who goes out to convert someone. The new conciliar and synodal concept of mission implies instead that the missionary goes out to let himself or herself be converted, or even better, to promote a process of mutual conversion of the gaze, of the mind, of action. Mission, inasmuch as it is decentralization, a second important aspect, concerns the attention that in the current synodal process, a call for a less top-down and centralist model of the Church, more capable of coming into vital contact with the diversity of peoples and cultures, in which the one gospel of Christ is incarnated. We read further in the document for the continental stage. An essential element of synodality, which still needs significant deepening and better understanding, is the call to a more interculturally conscious approach. Such an approach begins by walking together with others, appreciating cultural differences and understanding them as factors for growth. In no small measure, the call is to recognize, engage, integrate, and better respond to the richness of local cultures, many of which have worldviews and styles of action that are synodal. People express a desire to promote local culture, to integrate it with the faith, to incorporate it into the liturgy. It is precisely in order to favor a rereading of the synodal path, attentive to the plurality of cultures, that the 7 continental assemblies have been celebrated. For the preparation of the continental assemblies, the Secretariat of the Synod called upon the international meetings of bishops' conferences, which are present on almost all continents. These assemblies, like CELAM, CEG, etc. Final documents were the material for the drafting of the Instrumentum Laboris. Re-examine the peculiar instances of cultures and prevented the great machine of the Universal Synod from tarring local differences, neglecting the expectations of peoples. It was, in short, an effort to inculturate the synodal theme. After all, the novelty of the Continental Assembly carries with it an ambition that goes beyond the event of their convocation, inscribing itself coherently in the project of a more synodal church. The ambition to make the regional churches a functional ecclesial subject for that decentralization of the Catholic Church that Pope Francis has been hoping for since Evangelii Gaudium. Put another way, it is the ambition of a church that more fully realizes its Catholicity, that is, its multiform unity, a unity that doesn't that integrates the differences of experiences and recognizing the gifts of one another. And since then, a chance for Catholics. The expectation is, after all, that the Church, if it wants to serve this world in the consular logic of Gaudium et Spes, it will take on the continental instance more convincingly as the way for its mission in the third millennium. A third key word of the synodal path, also included in the title chosen by Pope Francis, is participation. The document for the continental stage picks up from the national synthesis the conviction that the mission of the Church is fulfilled through the life of all the baptized, and that this desire for co-responsibility is declined, first of all, in the key of service to the common mission, that is, with the language of ministeriality. We find here an echo of the magisterium of the Pope, for whom, by virtue of the baptism received, he writes, every member of the people of God has become a missionary disciple. Each baptized person, whatever his or her function in the Church and the degree of instruction in his or her faith, is an active subject of evangelization. And it would be inadequate to think of a scheme of evangelization carried out by qualified actors in which the rest of the faithful people were merely receptive to their actions. The new evangelization must imply a new protagonism of each of the baptized. The criticism of clericalism, which Pope Francis has repeated several times, and which has found a wide echo in the synodal path, is not the fruit of an ideological vision of reality, based on a sort of philosophical or political egalitarianism. It comes from the pastor's missionary anxiety. In fact, clericalism, by weakening the potential of our laity in the work of our evangelization, weakens the mission, making the Church more fragile in the face of the challenge of penetrating the gospel in today's world. It reduces the number of ecclesial agents in missionary service, restricting the mission to clerics only, and leaving the so-called simple baptized in a position of passivity, as if the missionary mandate of the risen Lord did not concern them too. And I refer to the paragraphs 53 and 54 of the Instrument Laboris, which emphasize the precious and indispensable contribution of every baptized person. Here then, the current synodal journey can help us rediscover a church more capable of participation and co-responsibility is a church ultimately more capable of mission. The baptismal munera are to be understood not as powers, but as empowerments to serve our brothers and sisters in the common faith and common humanity in the model of Christ, servant of all out of love. They are a gift because they come solely from God's grace, and at the same time, a task or debt because they require Christians to employ them for the benefit of others. Their purpose is ultimately fraternal communion in the church and evangelical witness in the world. That is mission. Participation is for mission. It is not intended to dominate spaces, but to open up new avenues for the gospel.